Hello everyone, I'm Leah Toms from the marketing team and I'd like to welcome you to our Q4 Pulse webinar. I have Nick France, CTO of SSL, and Tim Cullen, Chief Compliance Officer here for you today. They're here to update you about the latest industry trends and developments, what came out of the last CAP Forum meeting and many more. As always, we're recording the presentation and we'll share it with you after the webinar. And finally, if you've got any questions during the presentation, we'd love to hear them. Please use the chat function and we'll try and answer as many as we can at the end. Nick and Tim, what have you got for us today?
And finally, thank you for joining us on Halloween. As you see, we have a spooky theme. And hopefully we're not going to scare you with too much about what we're talking about today, but we will scare you a little. So the first thing we need to scare you with is shortening certificate lifespans. There is more development there, and it's been a very hot, interesting topic to a lot of people, and we'll get into that. There are a number of other changes here. We've got changes to DCV, possible changes to revocation rules. We'll give you an update on quantum cryptography and a couple more industry developments that we'll cover at the end. How you doing today, Nick?
I'm not too bad, Tim. Thank you. How are you?
Good. So let's jump in, starting with shortening certificate lifespans.
Yes.
So take us through the gist of it here, Nick.
Yeah, so we've talked about this many times before. Hopefully the audience are reasonably aware about this, but we finally got some hard information, I'd say. So March last year, at the end of the CAB Forum meeting that we had at that time in Canada, Google kind of published their policy document called Moving Forward Together. Basically a policy outlining things they wanted to change and improve in the web PKI, with public certificates. And one of those things that at the time was kind of controversial was the idea of moving down from 398-day certificates to 90-day certificates and moving down domain validation as well. There are a lot of other things in there, and you and I, Tim, as well as many people at Sectigo, have been talking about this for some time now, but we've been without a date, as you and I have discussed on many occasions, and had the question asked, when is this going to happen? We didn't know, and we weren't sure when the date would be. Now it's got to the point where we had a CAB Forum meeting just a couple of weeks ago in Seattle, and Apple there finally, and it's Apple, not Google, I would note, introduced a draft ballot. So that means it's going to go up for vote in the CAB Forum after some discussion, but they published a draft, and the draft is a phased proposal for short lifetime certificates. That's essentially
let's emphasize. Here's the phase down plan, but let's emphasize the point you just made. This is not a ballot that's going into a vote yet. This is a ballot that's in a discussion period right now. There has been feedback, I think Apple is openly listening, legitimately listening to the feedback, but this is what they threw out. So the gist of it is that three things will be reduced, right? The one we care about the most is certificate term, and certificate term will phase down. This is public TLS certificate term specifically. Will phase down according to the days you see here, right? So it goes down to 200 days in a little under a year, then 100 days a year after that, and then down to 45 days. Now, the reuse for domain control validation period would go down as well. Because as you recall, one of the things that we've talked about a lot is that the browsers want to see a close marriage of domain ownership to certificate ownership. And a long DCV reuse period just leaves more opportunity for those two to become misaligned. So they want to bring that down as much as you can. So you watch it stepping down exactly with certificate term until this last one at the end, where the DCV reuse period finally steps down to 10 days. Now, the third thing that goes on is there's what we call organization validation information. This is stuff you use to validate the organization for an OV or an EV cert. And the OV information right now has a reuse period of 825 days. And in this proposal, Apple's taking that down to 1 year. So those are the changes. Now that last one doesn't matter to Sectigo customers because we redo OV every year anyway. So your life won't change, but for the rest of the world, they will catch up to the new OV reuse period. So this is the proposal that Apple floated, what, 3 weeks ago, I think?
Yeah,
And
around 3 weeks ago.
yeah, and I think there's already been some feedback, right, Nick?
Yeah, so I think that's a good point you made earlier, Tim, is that this is a proposal, so it will be a ballot. This is not just them publishing their own policy document. They're actually actively trying, getting this to a CAB forum ballot proposal. I will also note we as Sectigo are endorsing this ballot. We are the endorsers behind Apple in this. We firmly believe that. I'm sure that's no surprise to anyone. But I just wanted to make sure it's clear that we are the endorsers here. But they have been listening and they are in active discussion. It's a very good point you made. And not that Google ever did this either, but Apple and Google are listening. They do want feedback. They don't pretend to know everything. And I think one of the important bits of feedback to note that's happened, and it's again, this is all discussion at the moment. This isn't final. There has been kind of a proposal which the Apple folks seem in agreement with, that the 45-day certificate term step down is not done in April of 27, it's done in September of 27. So you've got like a year between each one, a year to 200 days, then a year to 100 days, then a year to 45 days.
Yeah.
Again, seems like a reasonable thing. And I think the thing I like about this proposal the most, aside from it giving us timelines, which we've sorely needed, I think it's a very good kind of phase step down approach. Not that we expected someone like Google to turn around and say, hey, it's 90 days next week, but there was, some uncertainty over timelines. And this idea of stepping it down 200 days, 100 days, 45 days, I think is a very, very good one. And I think it's going to be the best proposal, and hopefully it will pass as a ballot.
And I think the step down is also interesting because we should talk about the step down. There's a lot to talk about here with the step down. So probably point number one when you go back to them listening is the step down is exemplary of them listening, because part of when Google originally floated this idea, let's go down to 90 days, a lot of people had a lot of things to say, and there was a sense that that this is going to be abrupt and harsh, and people aren't going to be able to deal with it. And you can tell that Apple was listening because they've come in with something that at least attempts to account for that concern, right? So when we move from 398 days to 200 days, which is half a year, basically, when we move to half a year, it's not impossible for people who are doing manual management today to continue to do manual management, but they're going to be well motivated to get automated. And by leaving that there for a year before they move again, what it does is it makes adjustment less painful, right?
Agreed.
And I see this. I mean, I wasn't there in the room when they did it, but I see this as Apple directly responding to the criticism and commentary that came up about the original proposal that Google proposed, right?
Yeah. Oh,
And
I
so
completely
I
agree.
see that as them listening. Yeah.
It is. It's listening. It's an active discussion, as I've said, and it is reasonable. I think you make a very good point there, Tim. This step down to 200 days, it will be painful. Let's make no bones about this. There is going to be some pain for a lot of people here, but we all know why. It is for the better and the greater safety of the internet at large. But this phase down to 200 days initially, we've still got 10, 11 months or so before that happens, if this all goes to plan. It's still viable to do some certificates manually at 200 days, right? It's still, you could automate half of your certificate estate and perhaps still manage at 200 days a couple of times a year. It's still possible, but it obviously does motivate you to move to automation and to not sit there and go, well, I'll just wait till it gets down to 100 days or 45 days. And there's enough time in between for automation and other technologies to be adopted, which do exist. Obviously, we've talked about this many times. The solutions to this absolutely exist. It's just the timeline is going to help motivate people to start looking at them more seriously than perhaps they have.
Yes. Now, the other thing, though, that is interesting, I think, is these numbers, right? So you might say 200 days, 100 days, these are oddly round numbers, right? Until you understand where Apple's going with this. And where Apple's going with this is just as 398 days is a year plus some cushion so that you can renew something early and still have it co-term when you originally expect it. 200 days is 6 months plus some cushion. 6 months will be roughly 180 days, depending on the 6 months. This gives you a little bit of extra time. So you can renew early and still keep your co-term schedule the same. 100 days is 3 months plus some cushion. So that
Yep.
you can be on a 3-month schedule, do it the same day of the month or the second Tuesday or whatever you're doing of the month. Keep it on a predictable schedule, and you've got some flexibility and some cushion so you can always keep it there, and you can even renew a little early. 45 days is 1 month plus some cushion. So now we're imagining you on a monthly cadence. Again, with a little bit of flexibility, you can renew early or you can deal with holidays or things along those lines. So when you start thinking of those in those terms, you can see that Apple is imagining that people get onto a regular 6-month cadence, and then they move to a regular 3-month cadence, and then they move to a regular 1-month cadence. And
There's
now
definitely
those
some
days
method
make
behind it.
sense,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Now those times make sense. So when I look at that, that's what I see.
Completely. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think that's
yeah,
the best explanation of the timelines. And
yeah,
it does make sense. This regular renewal
yeah.
period with a bit of a buffer, it works. And to be honest, I mean, one of my thoughts, Tim, is that I think the number of days is, and I'm sure you agree, is largely irrelevant. It's the fact that
Hmm.
it's moving down towards an end goal. What is
Yeah,
interesting as well that we haven't said explicitly is, of course, up till this point, we've spent, the better part of 18 months or so talking about 90 days, because that was Google's proposal, and Apple have
right.
taken it slightly further down to
Up to
45 days.
45
Um,
days.
they've not
That's
gone
right.
down as far as 10, although 10 is, as you said, for the domain validation reuse period.
Yep.
But the certificate lifetime isn't going down to 10 at the moment.
And
So it's proposed down to
10 is the
45.
lifespan where revocation checking goes away. Like there's a lot of stuff that's also going on around 10 days. It's very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Um,
But I would say
so
once you get
yeah,
down to something like 45 days and you're at the point where your certificate estate is automated and managed at 45 days, it probably isn't going to be too difficult to move that down to 30 to 14 to 10 to 7 maybe. Once you're at a point where things are automated, the reduction in lifetime is perhaps not a challenge. I mean, sure,
yeah,
there's things that need to be monitored elsewhere, but once you reach that 45-day threshold, it may go lower, is what I'm saying. It may go down to 10 days, but there's no need to put that in at this point because we've got to get
yeah,
there first. But also,
right,
once you're at 45 days, it's probably not a challenge to move down to 10.
right. Yeah, I agree with that. Right. Once once we're doing this once a month, doing it once a week doesn't seem like it's probably a problem. Right. And so the other thing I'm going to say, when you see all of this together and those days have been considered and they're all synced up and there's specific dates and everything, I think it's important. And you said this in the beginning, Nick, but let me just emphasize it. When Google put up the moving forward together item in March of 2023, that was an idea. That was a North Star. When Apple put up this repo a few weeks ago, that is a plan. And I think we've moved from a principle to a plan with this development. And that's a very important development. And even though some of the details here may change, this is just a proposal and this isn't necessarily what's going to ballot. And even if a ballot might not win, right? But there's an important sea change between Chrome saying this is something we would like to be the case, and Apple saying let's make it the case, and here's how we're going to do it, right? And I think that's an important difference.
Yeah, it's definitely a plan, and it's good because you wouldn't have expected this plan to come out of the blue. You wouldn't. I don't think any of us wanted
Yep.
a sort of plan like this to come out of the blue. But the 18 plus months that we've had as an industry, but also as an industry that's had to communicate this to a wider audience, we've had 18 months to kind of digest the information and digest Google's proposal. And I think, to be honest, a lot of it is intentional and positive to say, hey, this is what we're thinking of doing. You have 18 months to talk about it, to start working on it. And now there is a plan. And the plan gives you another 2 or 3 years before things actually, get to their end goal. So I think it's perfectly reasonable, but it is.
And I think there will be feedback on this plan. I do expect, because we've all been discussing this basic idea for such a long time, that the feedback is probably pretty predictable. And I'm not expecting to be really surprised by anything I've heard, and so far I haven't been.
No, I agree with that.
Yeah.
There's going to be people that don't, that say they're not going to be able to make these changes and not going to be able to do these things. And
That's
then there's obviously the
thing.
people that are strongly in favor of it. But you're going to get that with any kind of, systemic change to an industry.
Although, that's been the main thing. Like, we can't. And, I don't know. I think most of them probably can. So I think we've probably covered this. Certificate lifespans. I mean, this is part of a general trend, right? So we're looking at 45 days now, as you and I talked about. We think we see a lot of stuff crystallizing around 10 days. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a time in the future, years from now, when we're looking at getting to a maximum certificate lifespan of 10 days. It just feels like that's where the thought leaders in the industry, and especially the thought leaders in the browsers, are pointing.
Yes, given that we're incentivized for 10-day certificates or less, as we've mentioned before, where we can omit certain parts of the certificate and we can kind of, save some infrastructure costs for some things. Yes, I would agree. That's kind of, I mean, there's always limits to this.
Well, and 10-day DCV, yeah.
We've got like ephemeral certificates, which yes, but I think that one of the things to note, and when people have certainly asked me, where's the limit? Why don't you do certificates every day? Why don't you do them every hour? There are places where that works. There are infrastructures where that works. I think when we're talking about public certificates where people's browsers are involved, people's computers who critically can have clocks that are out of sync by hours or days, I think 10
and caching 7 to 10 days is kind and of things along those lines. Yeah, absolutely right. If I'm running my own Kubernetes infrastructure and my own hardware, I can literally issue certificates that are 5 minutes in turn. That works fine.
It doesn't matter. But if you're dealing with someone who might have a mobile phone on the other side of the world that's 4 days off, in our current
web PKI kind of environment, you're right. Something in the order of 7 to 10 seems to be kind of the lower limit. But that's great. It's so much better than what we have now. Like, if we get to the point where that's deemed to be a problem, let's cross that bridge when we get there, right? We've got a lot of work to do before we're even trying to tackle that problem. And if you're curious what it looks like, right, this is what the reduction has been over time. So you can see this, this is when things got knocked down to various terms. Before 2012, it could be any length. We say 10 years because we know there were 10-year certificates, but there was no cap. In principle, you could have issued a 100-year cert if you wanted. And then those go down, 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 down. And that's where we get now, where we're looking at getting down to 45 days in 2027. All right. So this probably makes great sense, right? In general, we have a 45-day survival guide. You can come get it from us. It covers 5 steps, right? We're kind of at the awareness step now, and then you can run through the rest of your steps where at the end of the day, you're actually able to achieve full automation, or what we call full crypto agility. I don't think we need to belabor that, but I will say there is a guide. It's free. You can get it and get into details on all of that.
I think the critical thing to mention is, Tim, is that, and we obviously talked about it before, is this is possible. 45-day certificates are possible. We at Sectigo have great swathes of customer base already using 90-day certificates. There's other CAs out there. There's Let's Encrypt. There's Google Trust Service who use only 90-day certificates. This
Right.
isn't impossible. The tools and the technologies exist. Are there edge cases that we, and again, we as Sectigo and we as an industry, are there edge cases that we need to look at? Are there problems we
Right.
still need to solve? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the key message here is the core of most people's web PKI certificate portfolios can be automated. The
Well,
one other thing I do want to say, sorry, go on, Tim.
and the vast majority of the active TLS certificates today are 90 days or shorter
Already.
in term.
Exactly.
Already.
And I think
Yep.
that leads into the final point that I wanted to say, which is this is going to make us as a CA, us as an industry, but also us as certificate users, so you enterprises and businesses, really evaluate if it's the right certificate for the right problem that you're trying to solve. And what I mean by that is you had the diagram before, Tim, with where we were doing 10+ year certificates, we were doing 15, we were doing 20-year certificates. And people could just go out, and if something needed a certificate, they'd go and grab a 10 or a 15-year one, they install it, and they'd forget about it. There was
Right.
never any evaluation done if a public certificate was the correct thing for that particular solution. Right? If it's something that's being used with a web browser or a web client or something that is the general public are accessing with their devices, yeah, probably needs to be a web certificate. But for many, many use cases, and these are the use cases where this 45-day certificate lifetime is going to be a problem, then there needs to be some evaluation done as to whether a publicly trusted certificate is the right solution. And I think that's the thing that we again, we as a collective group need to look at and evaluate. If you feel there is some part of your infrastructure you cannot handle 45-day certificates on, you cannot do automation, then reach out to us, reach out to your CA, whoever it is, and work together to evaluate whether a public certificate, which will be 45 days, is in fact the right solution. And if we can do that, I think that everybody can be in a position where they're either fully automated or using a different type of certificate or technology and not having to worry about this change.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
And that actually does lead us into the next topic slightly well, because one of the
Right.
things I did want to say as well is people often say, I struggle to do the automation, I might not be able to do that automation. There are circumstances where pretty much any customer has to
Right.
be able to get certificates revoked and reissued and reinstalled and reset up in a very, very short period. And those are
Absolutely.
types where there's some kind of incident with a certificate. So if your private key to your certificate is compromised, your CA is required to revoke that certificate within 24 hours, which means you
Yeah.
have 24 hours to get a replacement. And if that happens to be more than one certificate, you have to do the level of automation for 45 days certs very, very quickly in 24 hours. And that leads
Yes.
us into this discussion,
Right.
Tim, about a proposal from Mozilla.
Yeah. And so the public CA, so per the point that you're discussing, Nick, sometimes CAs have to revoke certificates, and sometimes the subscribers don't want those certificates revoked. It's not subscriber initiated, it's CA initiated. And under these circumstances, there has been a tradition in the industry of subscribers trying to convince CAs not to revoke their certificates. And this is what we call, so a DELREV stands for a delayed revocation. And a deliberate DELREV is a delayed revocation that doesn't owe itself to some kind of technical or procedural error that occurred in good faith. Rather, it owes itself to the fact that the CA, knowing that it is supposed to revoke these certs, just decides not to. And the reasons that the CAs give, always universally, when they've decided not to, what they say, well, the subscriber couldn't get the certs swapped out in time, and an outage here would be disastrous. Often with no real explanation of what constitutes disastrous, or why the subscriber couldn't get it done or anything along those lines. Now, if you look at these numbers over on the right, it's pretty crazy. I took this snapshot on September 20 of 2024. At that time, there were 70 open bugs in Bugzilla, 22 of which were for delayed revocation. and 20 of those were for deliberate delayed revocation. 20 of the 22. One was an accident and one was a meta bug, because this is such a rampant problem that Mozilla created a bug just to track the problem. And so 29%, right, nearly 1/3 of all of the open bugs in Mozilla were for this decision of CAs deliberately deciding not to follow the rules unilaterally because they don't wanna. And yeah, and this has been a hot
It's not
topic
good.
this year.
It has
It's not
been
good.
a hot topic.
Mhm.
And we've now got Mozilla, who have
Right.
decided that
And Mozilla,
there
so
needs to
Mozilla has
be
put its
some.
foot down. So Mozilla put something up in the month of September, and I just showed you the top of it. We'll go into what they say, where Mozilla has a proposal from the Mozilla Root program. And this is the boiled down version of the Mozilla proposal, right? And this is the gist of it. There's a lot of it behind it. One thing is Mozilla clarifies, first of all, Mozilla clarifies that the BRs in terms of revocation are still the rules and they must be followed. Just to be clear, they clarify this. But then they go on to say a few things. First of all is that it eliminates any thought of a right that a CA has to proactively grant a delayed revocation. So we saw a lot of these things now where the CAs just decided not to revoke, and it's not really, it seems doubtful that this actually came out of any kind of knowledge about what was going on at the subscriber. Rather, it was more just the CAs just decided they didn't want to do it. And instead, the subscriber has to go through a pretty rigorous process of
Yep.
requesting and justifying a delayed revocation. And then for any delayed revocation that has occurred, there are some pretty serious consequences. The first and more minor of them is that all of the delays will be granted with active reporting that the delay was granted, what the certs were, who the subscriber was, and why. And so there is a little bit of a public shaming here aspect here, because part of the why is that the subscribers couldn't perform basic IT operations correctly. So if you're a major bank and you can't do fundamental IT operations correctly, maybe the public deserves to know that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's one of the big angles of this.
Right.
It's not just the kind of punishment, as you said, that the domains that are delayed are then subject to requiring 90-day certificates. And bear in mind,
Yeah.
just for some context, this proposal was made before the Apple proposal was made, so there's maybe even a chance that 90-day will change. But either
Yep.
way, the idea is to shame and effectively punish people who,
Yeah.
organizations who,
And
as you say,
and
Tim, don't
and
have their
mitigate
IT infrastructure
the
together.
problem, right? So the idea is, if we can't rely on the fact that these certificates are going to be replaced in the event that a revocation event must occur, then let's at least mitigate the danger by making it shorter. So if you take them from 398 days down to 90 days, or maybe it turns out to be 45 days, then what you do is you mean that the overall risk that we have from this lack of agility is less. And so, yeah, the second point you made is very important, right? Which is any domain name that is granted a delayed revocation would be reduced to 90-day certificates from any CA for the next 2 years. And so this does a few things, right? Number one is it's very motivational for subscribers to become certificate agile. Number
Yeah.
two is it's very motivational for subscribers not to request a delayed revocation unless they really need it.
Mm-hmm.
And then number three is it mitigates the risk moving forward, because from now on they'll be on shorter lived certs.
And you would hope that would drive them towards some kind of
Right.
automation. Or, as I said earlier, I think one of the other angles of this kind of public shaming and these short lifetime certs is it hopefully would make people think about is it an appropriate use case for a public certificate? If I
Yes.
cannot cycle this certificate out in an industry required period, so 24 hours, 5 days, then maybe this isn't the right place for a publicly trusted certificate.
Yes.
And I think the idea, like you said earlier, Tim, the idea behind this is to kind of make anybody think twice before either asking
Yes.
for a delayed revocation or not believing it's something they need to prepare for.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely 100%. And I don't want to get into too much detail on this, but we do have it here. So in particular, the subscriber would have to proactively request with a clear claim and explanation why this system is timely, is critical, such that an outage would be really terrible, and why they can't update it on a timely basis. This would have to be signed by a company officer or legal representative. So this would have the weight of the company's official word behind it. This isn't just some sysadmin who doesn't want to be bothered to do their job. The granted requests would have to be published to the community for full scrutiny by the community. So if CAs are being loose and lax, who can do it, and if subscribers can't get their job right, everybody's going to know. And then the CAs would be required to produce summary statistics. So this makes it very much makes the subscriber has to take meaningful, proactive effort that is signed by an officer of the company or the legal department, saying they need this. So this isn't accidental or thoughtless. This is deliberate. And then again, the 90-day limit rolls around, and in this case, the 90 days would be restricted for all CAs, not just the time limit. Mozilla went on to clarify later that they're thinking about a 2-year time limit on this, but it'd be all CAs, not just the CA who issues it. So if a subscriber is granted a delayed revocation, now they're knocked down to 90 days, and they can't solve it by going and buying from somewhere else.
Yeah, they can't go CA shopping. But I mean, I think one of the big points with this, Tim, is what you mentioned right at the start of this section, is that so much of the delayed revocations we've seen are CAs, and it's not always the CA's fault. They are told by the subscribers sometimes, but CAs saying, "Oh, it's a critical system. It's a critical system. Can't possibly change this. It's a critical system." And the intent of this proposal is to really say, well, if you claim it's a critical system, let's have evidence, right? Let's see.
Yep.
I mean, if there is a reason you can't change out your certificate for, heartmonitors.healthcarecompany.com and people might die, then let's explain that. And
show us
again, that goes into the fact that maybe having a web PKI certificate on any kind of healthcare device is probably not the best idea in the first place. But it means that these cases can be brought to light, scrutinized, and hopefully adjusted.
Right. And it means more granularity and closeness, right? Because I think one of the things we saw, if we use your example, is maybe I'm somebody who manufactures heart monitors. I do lots of stuff. I use certificates for lots of reasons. And it might be that the certificate in question is the system that the employees use to request vacation. Well, okay, if the system that the employees use to request vacation goes down, nobody's heart will stop beating. And the fact that you make heart monitors doesn't mean that that's a critical system. And I think we saw an awful lot of that, where everybody.
Yeah, a lot of it was, I mean, a critical system, but critical to who? Critical to you internally is very difficult to, critical to an entire nation or, a hospital full of patients. There's different levels of criticality. And because there was no requirement to be detailed in these sort of reports and requests, everything was very vague. And really, we all had no idea. We had no idea whether it was, a critical system component of an air traffic control system, or as you mentioned earlier, not to pick on any individual, but perhaps it was a sysadmin that didn't really want to do the job that week. And this is really a move in the direction of trying to get some level of accountability to motivate people that feel they have these certificates in critical places to either think about better automation or think about replacing with a more appropriate technology.
Yep. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. So this is, as we've said a bunch of times, this is a proposal from Mozilla. Mozilla is an open source project, which means that still to this day, everything happens transparently in public dialogue. The fact that it's a proposal does not necessarily mean that it will happen or that it will happen the way it's said. So let's point a couple things. It is in discussion now. They already have made adjustments based on feedback they've gotten. This is something that Mozilla has the ability to make unilaterally. This does not involve a CAB form ballot. This is not a ballot level thing. This is just a thing that Mozilla can do if they choose to do. So I feel like there's enough momentum and power behind this that something akin to this proposal will go into effect. Even if it's not the exact proposal that we're looking at, something that feels an awful lot like it and accomplishes the same basic goals, I think will be policy sometime next year.
I agree, Tim. I think something like this has to happen. I mean, with that context from earlier, is this discussion happened just kind of prior to Apple proposing their ballot for short lifetime certs, and I think there needs to be some alignment there. I think the short lifetime cert proposal, hopefully, when that comes to some firm agreed upon dates, there will be, perhaps this will be adjusted a little bit. Perhaps there's no need for a 2-year time limit, because by the time this policy kicks in, everybody's going to be on 45-day certs in 2 years or whatever anyway. So there will need to be a little bit of alignment, but I do agree with you that something here is going to happen, and it's because it needs to happen. My big thing is the point I keep repeating. It just means that appropriate use of technology in the right place is going to be something people are going to have to consider, rather than just going, hey, I can get this cert from Sectigo and get this cert from Let's Encrypt and just put it there and it works, with no thought about whether that is actually a good place for that technology to be.
Yes. So stay tuned on this. There's going to be more on this. I'm sure we'll talk about this in our next pulse in 3 months.
I'm sure we will.
Changes to DCV. So there's a couple things going on with change to DCV. One, of course, is that multi-perspective issuance corroboration continues to move forward. This is a defense against a BGP attack, where basically I can use Border Gateway Protocol to trick DNS into going to the wrong server, and instead of going to a real server, it goes to me, and then I can perform DCV for a domain I don't own, and then go request that certificate, and that could lead to some pretty serious spoofing attacks.
Yeah. DCV, just quickly, because it gets different terminology in different places. We're talking about domain control validation or domain verification.
Sure.
Proving you own or control, at least, proving you control a domain name that's going to go into a certificate. And like you said, Tim, this is it's a long-winded term, MPIC, multi-perspective issuance corroboration. But as you said, it's just about doing the DNS lookup, looking at a particular record from multiple locations over the internet to make sure that your current perspective isn't being attacked.
Correct.
It's a very real problem. Attacks have been demonstrated with this kind of exploit, if you like. It's something that is a real risk. And so as an industry, I mean, this discussion has been bubbling along now for a couple of years at least, if not more. Some great researchers at Princeton in New Jersey were looking, or still are looking, into this and helping spearhead the efforts. But it's now become a much more defined standard. It has some dates as to when we as CAs are going to have to implement it. So we, like other CAs, are furiously building and testing systems to be able to do this, and have to spin up things in different clouds, and make the calls from various locations, and then come up with a quorum. But it's a very effective standard, or a very effective set of guidelines. It is going to be required from, I think it's reporting only we have to do by early next year, and then kind of a hard fail if it doesn't work by later next year. But the last point is probably mostly the interesting one for people, which is you as a subscriber probably shouldn't need to change anything or do anything. I'm saying probably in a slightly strange tone there, because I am sure there will be some customers out there who are, perhaps doing something fancy with their DNS, and when records are made, they're giving different values depending on where you are, or they're doing some kind of blocking of DNS, or particularly the what's called the agreed upon change for DCV. So you can prove you control a domain by putting a very small file on your web server to say, hey, this is really me.
Yep.
And, you know, if you've got some kind of filtering or bot protection, or you try and block certain countries from accessing your website, that's not going to work in this situation. So there'll be some edge cases where this kind of thing might have some problems within your organization, but by and large, this is more just something we as CAs implement, and it makes everyone safer.
It should mostly be invisible to subscribers, and that's what we want, right? And to the degree that we can accomplish that, that is success, and that's the goal.
Exactly.
All right, now what
We're
won't
aiming
be invisible is that basically there was a very well publicized, about a month ago, very well publicized attack by some White House researchers where they managed to take over the Whois record for the .mobi TLD. And they had complete control. They could have done anything. And this has called into question whether relying on Whois records should be part of DCV at all. And the basic assumption is that no, it should not be. So that was just the episode we did on root causes about it. But as a complication, as a concept of this, there's a proposal right now that would deprecate Whois as an email source for email-based DCV as of June 15, 2024. I believe that this ballot will pass, or it will pass. If it doesn't pass, it'll get modified to get rid of whatever the objection is, and then it will pass. But I believe this ballot will pass. We already took one run at it. And even if this ballot doesn't pass, Whois-based DCV is going away.
I mean, I would almost extend that a little bit, Tim, to say email-based DCV is probably going to go away eventually.
Yeah.
I think
in the long term, I think you're right. Yeah.
Anybody listening who is strongly reliant on using email for domain verification would do well to look at alternatives. Ideally, the best recommendation, really the only recommendation, is to use DNS for domain verification. If you think back 25 minutes ago to what we were talking about with shortening lifetimes and the DCV lifetimes being reduced, email it's not a fully reliable method of communication. It's not really very automatable. There's a whole lot of nuances to it and problems with it. Having to do that process every 10 days via email for all of your domains, and then if an email gets missed or someone's away or it goes to the wrong inbox or drops in your spam filter, you've got some significant issues. So I would still expect that at some point
there's also a BGP problem with emails. So just as you can border gateway BGP a shared secret, or just BGP a file, or BGP a DNS record, what about using BGP to incorrectly divert email?
There's still those kind of possibilities. Yeah,
right.
It's not
so now I'm imagining
system for
I have to send you the same email from 7 different geographically diverse locations, and you have to respond to at least 5 of them correctly. Okay, yeah. What percentage of subscribers are going to get this right? Right? What percentage of people are going to go, oh, I already answered that email, I'm not going to click on any of these other ones? So it's fundamentally, it's never going to work. It's not going to work. An MPIC style solution is not going to work for it. And as you said, a shortening DCV time period is not going to work for it. So, and email is just a very insecure communication method in general.
I mean, I will say email, like you said, Whois is going to go away. So if anybody's reliant on the Whois emails, and to be honest, Whois has been on the way out for a number of years now. Between the GDPR and Whois servers kind of rate limiting single people calling them and everything else, it's been increasingly difficult to get a usable result from a Whois query for many years anyway. But if you are someone who is relying on Whois to verify your domains, if you have to stick with email, just note that the constructed email addresses, so admin @ administrator @ and so on, will still be valid. They aren't going away yet.
For now.
So you could use those instead. But as I've said, the strongest recommendation really is to start looking at DNS-based DCV, because it's a better, safer, more automatable, and many other benefits to using it, and certainly won't have the problems or be deprecated like Whois email is.
All right. So, post-quantum cryptography. The latest step in this process, as you may know, there have been 4 algorithms that NIST settled on, 1 KEM and 3 digital signature algorithms. 3 of these 4, the ones that formerly were called Crystal Kyber, Crystal Dilithium, and Sphinx, have now been renamed to MLChem, MLDSA, and SLHDSA. So you get to learn some new words. And there are now standards. So FIPS standards 203, 204, and 205 refer to those 3 algorithms. So those are codified FIPS standards, and that means that the next step in the process can continue. The last one that was called Falcon, which is now renamed to FNDSA, is expected to be released this year. It's not out from NIST yet, but NIST has communicated that it will be done this year. And so because those standards are here, this is the next step in the process. So what happens now? Well, now it goes into IETF's court, and IETF needs to get us a closer, tighter set of rules based on these standards that we can actually use with certificates. And when that is done and we can all build to the same specs, then at that point, a few things happen. One is technology vendors can start actually incorporating this into their solutions. And number 2 is that the CA Browser Forum can build public certificate standards that are based on what IETF gave us. And so at the end of that, that's when you're going to be able to get a certificate. So this is still a ways off. You're not going to be able to get a public PQC certificate, I don't think, in 2025. I think you'll be able to get a private PQC certificate in 2025. I think it'll probably be 2026 before you can get a public PQC certificate. But assume, a good working assumption is that every single piece of software that you operate anywhere in your enterprise will need an update. Everyone,
absolutely,
without exception.
Yeah, but I think the main technologies from a public side will be, your browsers probably updates more rapidly, but then your operating system and your other, more disparate software is probably going to need what are going to be slower updates as well. So it would definitely be something where there's going to be a lot of software updating. I think the point you mentioned about what could happen next year, Tim, something I've certainly said when talking about this is everything you've got here is correct, but we as a public CA are kind of a little bit bottom of the ladder on this, right? We have all these things that you've said that have to happen first. We have to have the browsers and the OS guys have to agree on what these certificates will look like. They have to, code support for it into Chrome, into Safari, into Edge and everything else, and make it Firefox and make them all work. So that all has to happen before we can even test certificates. Yes, you could probably get some private, post-quantum certificates today. I mean, I'm sure there's toolkits and there's software solutions that do it. Yep. Will that be the standard in the future? Will that be what your browser or your OpenSSL or your any language you write code in going to use in the future? Perhaps not. And I think that's the one thing I've been saying is just be aware that this is definitely happening. Be aware you've got a lot of updates to do. Be aware that your CA is going to be prepared and ready as we are, and I'm sure all the CAs are, as soon as standards appear. But also be aware not to commit yourself to a solution before it's well standardized. I think that's the other thing I'd say. Just don't start building against something you aren't sure isn't going to be the real solution in the end, because that's just a waste of time for everybody.
Yeah, and organizations with vast resources like Cloudflare and Google and Apple have been doing that, but they have vast resources. And most of us probably don't have that level of resources. So we want to be
vast resources and some incredibly intelligent people as well.
Yeah,
and a lot of post-quantum stuff is very widely deployed already. I think Cloudflare and Chrome particularly, there's millions of connections done a day over PLS using post-quantum algorithms, just not in the certificates themselves yet.
Between Chrome and Cloudflare, according to Cloudflare, 20% of their endpoint connections are PQC today. So how's that for a mind blower? I know.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So, but wait a minute, Tim. I've listened to other podcasts from you and other webinars from you and your podcast, and you've talked a lot about the on-ramp and round 4, and so NIST is still making stuff. Yep, they are. and they're going to keep on making stuff, and we're probably going to get one winner out of round 4, and we're probably going to get 1 to 2 winners out of the on-ramp. So imagine upwards of 3 additional algorithms being added, but this is going to take years. And it's widely considered, including from Dustin Moody, who runs this NIST program, that we can't wait. So we're moving forward on the 4 we have, and we're going to continue to get some more eggs in our basket, or some more baskets to hold our eggs, right? And that's what's going on with that. So there will be more development. There will be new algorithms that come later, but these ones here are the ones we have now, and these are the ones that we need to move forward with. And these are the ones that are being standardized and built around. Okay, pkimetal, we can make this quick.
Yes, we'll do this quickly because, well, I picked partly because it's one of our solutions, and partly because we want to say thank you to Rob for putting it together.
Yeah, so linting is a very important part of certificate compliance. Basically, what you can do is you can check for discrete things inside of certificates. The certificate must have this value, or can't have this value, or must be one of these things. And it's very easy to build discrete checks that look at a certificate that goes out before it goes out to block a lot of obvious, unambiguous misissuance. And linting is incredibly powerful in doing this. It's a fundamental. It is an upcoming requirement that all CAs are going to need to lint, and there are free, high-quality third-party linting tools available, multiple of them. So it sounds great. So how come we aren't linting everything? Well, it turns out it is surprisingly hard to implement linters correctly in a CA issuance environment for a variety of reasons. And so Sectigo's distinguished engineer, Rob Stradling, has built what's called pkimetal, which is the first PKI meta linter. And what pkimetal does is it takes a bunch of like 8 different linting tools, and it acts as a bridge between them and your system. So all you have to do is write to pkimetal once, and pkimetal does all the rest of this work for you. It's easily configurable. You can turn off or off the linters you want. And it's open source. It's an open source project. So Rob Stradling created it. He's also the guy who created Search, the de facto tool for recording certificates, right?
Yeah.
But now it's open source. So we're hoping that the rest of the community will get involved, and we'll have a bunch of people making contributions. And we've already seen some commentary on the repo, and hopefully pkimetal will move forward and will make linting implementation easier for all CAs and improve quality, which will reduce the number of the certificate revocation events that we were talking about earlier.
And it is, as well as it's open source and everything you've said, Tim, it is something Sectigo are using and running in production. It's working wonderfully. And I just wanted to add that in case anybody's even hesitant about giving it a go. Have a look.
Fabulous.
Try it. Fantastic.
I love it. So we have recently reported, or we reported in earlier episodes of Pulse, that there was a ballot that made OCSP, removed OCSP as a requirement in the CAB forum requirements. However, there was still at least one major root program, which was Microsoft, that had not removed it from their own root program requirements, which meant that we had to continue to offer OCSP. We didn't have the option of not OCSPing. Well, RIP OCSP, because OCSP is now officially optional. It's not a CAB form requirement. It's also been removed as a root program requirement from Microsoft. Now, for every cert over 10 days, some kind of revocation checking is still required. So you need to have CRL or OCSP. However, for certificates under 10 days, and this comes back to the point you and I were talking about earlier, Nick, 10 days comes up a lot. For certificates of 10 days or less, I should have said 10 days or less, no revocation checking is required. So for those, you don't need to have OCSP or CRL. You don't have to need anything. So again, this is more something that CAs do. It doesn't necessarily affect you as a subscriber, but OCSP,
it does have some benefits. It does have some benefits, all right. It's benefits to us as a CA because the certificates are smaller. We don't have to run the OCSP infrastructure in the future potentially, it's a fairly, high burden service to run. It's complicated. You can't just get it off the shelf, for example. So that would be good for us. Makes the certificate smaller for you as a subscriber. Means that you don't have to have all your clients, if they're internal, be able to communicate to an external service and check things. And one of the big reasons that I think we mentioned before, Tim, that OCSP is kind of on the way out from the browsers and the trust stores is it does have some privacy implications, right? If the CAs, even a big CA, or if you got together, you can potentially log this information that OCSP requests are made and sort of semi-track people across what sites and certificates they're looking at, given so much of the world is HTTPS today. So it does have those kind of implications, and we'd like to move away from that. We'd like not to be anywhere near to that, not that we do keep that data anyway, but CAs in general don't want to be involved, and browsers don't want that to be a privacy issue. So removing OCSP is just one of the better ways to do that, I think.
Yep, agreed. All right. If you like this conversation, there is the Root Causes podcast, which we mentioned earlier. This thing, we put out new episodes every week where I and my co-host talk about a bunch of topics like the ones that we talked about today. If you follow Root Causes, you would have heard about all these things because we talk about all these things on a regular basis. We mentioned our 90-day survival guide is actually a 45-day survival guide. And that too is something we'll encourage you guys to come have a look at. And with that, Leah, I think we have time for questions.
Yes, we had a few. Do you think Google and Apple will align and find a common maximum term?
Absolutely. So Chrome has already stated in a rather public CAB forum way that they like this proposal fundamentally, and they're lined up with it. So I think, again, if you look at what Chrome said and moving forward together, this was more on a, hey guys, we got to get down to shorter life certificates sort of message. What Apple has now is Apple has a real specific, like, look, this is how we should go about it. And all the indications are that Chrome is happy with that and is prepared to line up behind it.
Right.
I agree.
Next question is, after January, can I still use email for DCV?
Yes, yeah. So email itself, as we said earlier, is still going to be an option, right? So the what we call the constructed email addresses, which is if you're requesting a certificate for nickfrance.com, then we can do DCV for admin at, administrator at, postmaster at, and webmaster. They're default, they're allowed, and email will work for any of those addresses on any domain for the foreseeable future, at least. I mean, subject to what Tim and I have said about we feel it's going away. So email will still be an option. What you won't be able to do after early next year is to use emails that we as a CA might find on a whois record for the domain. So email itself isn't going away, just the ability to use an email address that's published on a whois record. But as I said earlier, I would strongly recommend anybody using email for DCV today to start thinking about how they can migrate away from that to a better, more automatable solution using DNS, for example.
Okay, great. Next question is, will the new PQC algorithms from the later rounds replace the algorithms we have now?
No, I think that's a great question. The ones we have now are going to get built into stuff. They're going to be around. And what would make them go away is if one of them proved to be untrustworthy, essentially. If one of them got defeated, that would be the reason we'd stop using them. But that actually is the reason we need other ones, right? Or one of the reasons we need other ones is in case that happens. And so, we've got a whole global digital industry. Tens of thousands of pieces of software are going to be gearing up around using these new algorithms, and those are going to stay. Nobody's going to go and try to take them out. The extra ones will just be extra ones. There'll be other options.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I think we've got time for maybe one more question.
Yeah.
How will the certificate change impact the security of IoT devices in other constrained environments?
I mean, I think the impact is going to be positive, just like the impact of this change is going to be positive overall. I mean, having shorter lifetime certificates means there's less time for bad things to happen and everybody's safer. Given that this has specifically mentioned IoT devices and constrained environments, I think what you're looking at here is the point I was making several times earlier, which is the appropriate technology for the right location. IoT devices, for example, if they're using certificates to identify themselves, you know, every IoT device you have has its own certificate with its serial number in. That absolutely is not a use case for the same certificates I might have on my own website, my own shop or blog. Right? They're two different use cases, and the same with constrained environments. If it's a constrained environment, depends on the meaning of constrained. If it's constrained from a memory and a CPU point of view, then you probably don't want a big public certificate anyway, and that does have some other questions and implications with post-quantum. But if you're talking about constrained as in internet access, for example, then it still probably shouldn't require a public web certificate because it's a constrained environment. You control all the endpoints, you can use a private CA, you can use alternative technology. So I think it will impact those areas by making them safer, but by making them use an appropriate technology, which is perhaps not the public PKI and public certificates.
Thank you, Nick. We're at the full hour. We had a few more questions. We'll come back to you directly on those. Thank you, everyone, for your time. And thanks, Nick and Tim. If you've got any more questions, do get in touch with the Sectigo team. We've got a new webinar coming up around 45-day TLS specifically at the end of the month. Sign up is already open on the website. We'd love to see you there. But for now, thank you and have a good rest of your day.